now into the post-flop portion of this video, and this is a controversial one because what I'm about to say isn't true, but it's to express a certain point, which is betting half pot is a mistake, quote brackets, most of the time. And we can jump into a very useful feature of GTO Wizard to see why. Okay, so this is a situation, 40 big blinds effective, the low jack has raised, and the big blind is called. And this is the reports tab in GTO Wizard. This is an aggregate report of every type of flop and the broad actions that get taken on that type of flop. Most of the time, the big blind checks and checks the low jack. So this is what the low jack does. So, and what we can see before we look in any particular flops, they check 16% of the time. The low jack is the pre-flop opener. They're going to bet a lot. And we've got bet 20% pot, bet 33% pot, bet 55% pot, which is half pot in this example, 83%, and the overbet of 125%, and they never really go all in. What we see first of all is that the two smallest bet sizes are the most commonly used one. Between them, it's more than 50% of the time. Then we've got the large and overbet size, which between them is used about 16% of the time. So in the middle, half pot is only used about 16% of the time. And Idara would argue that practically you could bring that number down even more. Would you agree? And if so, why?
Yeah, I would agree. I think back in the day when we all learned poker 15 or 20 years ago, we were told, okay, well, you've raised before the flop, so you have to bet the flop, and half pot seems like a decent size to bet. So most people, that was kind of their strategy. They see bet 100% of the time, half pot. With the advances of solvers and just the advances of poker strategy in general, people have started to realize that there are some situations where there's actually a lot of situations where you just want to bet small, and there's some situations where you want to bet big, and they achieve different things. When you're betting 100% of the time, for example, you open the button, the big blind defends, the flop comes ace 8-2. He checks. Well, you have the stronger range pre-flop. You have all the strongest hands. You pocket aces, pocket eights, pocket twos, ace eight, ace two, etc., and all the strong aces, ace king, ace queen that he doesn't necessarily have. So you get to bet 100% of the time. But because you're betting 100% of the time, you are betting a lot of trash as well. You're betting all of your misses, all your king highs, queen highs, jack highs, 10 highs, etc. So in that situation, the size that makes the most sense is to bet small, and that gives your opponent the most difficult decisions. If you bet half pot, then they can just hang on when they have a pair or something, and they can fold everything else. But when you bet really small, they have to start hanging on with other types of hands too, like maybe king highs and queen highs. So you're actually giving them a difficult decision. And at the other end of the scale, sometimes there are situations where if you're going to bet, you're going to want to bet big. For example, same situation, button opens, big blind defends, flop comes 8-5-2, say. Now, if we flop top pair, say with ace eight, or we have a vulnerable overpair like pocket nines, if we bet small in the situation and our opponent calls, there's almost no turn card we're going to like, because every turn card will either be an over card to make a better pair for our opponent, or all of the undercards, the cards between eights and an eight or a two, can make straights, two pairs, trips, etc., for our opponent. So in that situation, it kind of makes sense to bet big, but so we go with a big bet. The medium sized bet, the half pot bet, doesn't really achieve a lot. Usually the two situations where we're betting on a particular street are either A, we have a huge range advantage and we're betting everything, and if that's the case, we usually bet small, or B, we don't have quite the same advantage. We have a lot of hands that are just going to want to check, but our hands that do want to bet big, and then we can, the bigger we bet, the more bluffing we can do as well. So that's kind of the thinking behind that. Whereas the half pot bet, like it really doesn't achieve much. It's kind of too costly for our bluffs, and it folds out too much to get called when it's a value bet.
I don't want to delve too much into any one specific hand, but is there any reason why you'd categorize a medium-sized bet to be useful, or is it just something the solver does to extract a little bit more value with a certain portion of the range when they're mixing their bets?
Usually, when you see the mediums that say the half pot bet used, it's usually it's a few outlier cases. Like on a board like 8-5-2, just if you click that and let's look at the heavily bet boards. You can see it's a lot of 3 high card boards, and those are boards which are very dynamic. So, we have clear range advantage on a board like Queen Jack 10, but there's obviously lots of bad turn cards that could come for us. So, but at the same time, the board is so dynamic that we can't really get away with doing an overbet, because if we do an overbet, then when one of those cards comes on the turn, we're in real trouble. Generally, we want to overbet on boards where there are a certain amount of bad turn cards for us. But when there's an overwhelming amount of bad turn cards for us, as there is on a board like Queen Jack 10 flush draw, because in addition to straight completing, trip completing, 2-pair completing cards, there's also flush completing cards. So basically half the deck is bad for us. We don't really want to put too much money in. We're kind of torn in two directions. On the one hand, the board is so dynamic, we want to bet big. But on the other hand, there are so many bad turn cards that if we do bet big and one of those turn cards comes, we're going to regret having made the pot so big. So it is kind of that sort of situation. Ironically, these are the types of boards that people used to just bet really, really big, because these were the one type of boards they were like, oh, there's so many draws. I've got ace queen. I need to really, really charge my opponent. But if your opponent has a hand, he's not folding. And then one of the bad cards comes on the turn, and now you're looking at a huge bloated pot. So it's kind of a trade-off between, on the one hand, yes, we want to bet big because there's lots of really bad turn cards. But on the other hand, there's so many bad turn cards. We don't want to bloat the pot and make it huge.
Now, this one will surprise a lot of people. People should be donk leading more often, and the word donk leading it already conjures up negative connotations because of the donkey imagery. Donk leading is when somebody leads into the person who was the aggressor on the previous street. This was considered a very big mistake back in the day. It still is on certain types of boards, but on other boards it isn't. Let's have a look at what I mean.
Yeah, before we go on to that, just to talk about that a little bit first, like there used to be a huge emphasis placed on something that was called the betting initiative, which was whoever was the aggressor on the previous street. And there was a belief that somehow whoever had the betting initiative was the only person who got to bet the next street. And also conversely, it was important to keep the betting initiative. Now, I remember the first time I worked with a post-flop solver about 10 years ago, PO, and I set up all the ranges and I set up the sizes. And then the one thing that really surprised me was it didn't ask me who had the betting lead. And I was like, huh? This must
Literally,
be...
the first time you showed me a PO blew me away for the exact same reason. That was the thing. I remember saying, no, but who was the pre-flop raiser? This doesn't
Yeah.
make sense.
And
Yeah.
and the answer is that from a theoretical point of view, it doesn't matter. Like it does matter in the sense that normally the person who's the pre-flop or the aggressor on the previous street has the stronger range. So therefore, they're more likely to be able to bet on a board. But it's not true in all cases. And we're going to look at a specific example of where it's not true. And really the reason why one person is betting on a board and the other person isn't is they have a stronger range. That is usually the person who bet the previous street, but not always.
Okay, so we are back in the GT tab. This is the same situation. Low jack is open, big blind has defended. We're on the previous part of the game tree now, which is the very first action from the big blind. Now, as you can see from the main aggregate report, it's almost 100% of the time that the big blind checks. This would make sense to a lot of people. The pre-flop aggressor has got the stronger range most of the time, and you don't want to be leading into someone with such a strong range. That is the quote-unquote donk lead that we should be avoiding. However, there are some situations where that isn't the case. And these are them. So I've just clicked on. So there are situations where it's as common as 52% of the time to lead out. And you can see the types of boards where this happens. All very, very clear what the common characteristic is. They are low to middle in connected boards boards where I'd say with every single one of them there is a flopped straight possible. And I think probably we should look at, if nothing else, just memorize 654 because it's a good kind of broad guideline for the types of board that we're talking about here. If we jump into it and see exactly what the big blind leads with. It's almost everything in the range because it's half of the range.
You can see on the left we have the big blinds range, and on the right we have the low jacks range. And both players can have flopped a set, but the big blind has a set more often because they have 8-7 off, they have 7-3 suited, and they have 3-2 suited. All of those hands are missing from the low jacks range. So that's referred to as the nutted advantage. The very, very best hands, the big blind has more of them, and because of that, the low jack should be proceeding with caution. But if we go a little bit further down, we'll actually see that they also have two pair way more often.
Yep.
And they have top pair way more often, and second pair and third pair. Now that gives us a clue as to why we're leading. We're not necessarily, sometimes people go, oh, well, if I have 8-7, I lead because I don't want it to go check, check, and I want to start building a pot. That's reasonable. But to be honest, the hands that are more interested in leading are your vulnerable pairs. Like if you flopped a pair on this board, you don't want it to go check, check, and then any overcard that comes on the turn, you're going to have to worry about. So you can see that a lot of the pair hands just go ahead and bet. What allows them to bet is the fact that they're not the only types of hands we're betting. We are also betting 8-7. We're also betting our straights some of the time. We're betting our two pairs a lot as well. So when we bet, our opponent has to guess whether we have a super strong hand, a very strong hand like two pair, a strong but vulnerable hand like one pair, or a total airball. And that puts them in a really difficult spot. It's very easy for them to make a mistake. If they always play it safe and go, oh, well, this is not my board, I guess I'm going to fold my ace king. Now we're just bluffing them to death. But if they hang on too much and go, wait a minute, why are you donk leading into me? You're supposed to check to me, I raise. Well, then we have a lot of really strong hands that love that as well. So it's basically just sort of to keep your opponent guessing. You're doing it with all these different types of hands for different reasons. And your opponent doesn't know which of those types, what exact type or class of hand you have.
I used to really struggle with. I had no problems like leading with a hand like 7-4 suited, which is a pair and can make all manner of strong hands on the turn and river. I used to struggle with leading with hands like Queen 6 suited, which is just a pair of sixes and into a strong pre-flop range. But if we look at what happens when we check instead, as you can see, this very, very strong pre-flop range from the low jack gets checked back more than half the time. And as Dara said, we don't want them to do that with a hand like King Queen suited or King Jack suited or Ace Jack suited or even like King 7 suited or King 8 suited, because we don't know quite what they've got, but any high card is bad for us. So we're betting to protect against the check back, is the way I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you're now I guess the caveat we put on that is that if you're playing against a player who's completely unthinking and is old school and thinks, oh, I'm the pre-flop aggressor, I have to bet this flop, then you don't need to check anymore. You can go for check raises with your really strong hands, or and indeed your bluffs. But for the good thinking player who will even check hands as strong as aces and kings some of the time, then you have to be you have to do more leading with your strong hands, and because you're leading your strong hands, you get to do some bluffing as well.
Absolutely. But yeah, the big takeaway from this is is the types of hands I think that lead. Once again, it's all this stuff here. It's what people would call wet hands back in the day, middling hands, not super low, but not super high either. Just things that can make 9 high straights and below, I think is probably
the presence of straights is striking, and that's usually what people focus on most. But to be honest, that's not the most important characteristic. Like, we're not going to lead on a flop like Jack 10-9, even though we can have straights there as well.
Yeah.
Because our pairs on those board, first of all, we're not going to have an advantage. We're not going to have top pair more often than the razor. And
No.
secondly, our pairs are not going to be as vulnerable. But on 654, it's crucial to understand that we, apart altogether from the straights, we're going to have two pair and very vulnerable pairs far more often than our opponent. And that's really what drives our incentive to bet.